I was tired. My feet ached and all I wanted to do was get home, peel off my work uniform and collapse into bed. The late shift at the diner was always brutal. Irritable customers, low tips, and a manager that felt as if his job was his life's calling. But at least the roads were quiet as I drove home. Just a few more miles, I told myself. And that's when I saw him. A man on the side of the road struggling with a small nightstand. He was trying to load it into his car, a bright yellow Volkswagen Beetle. It was parked awkwardly on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. The piece of furniture seemed comically mismatched for the tiny car, and his arm was in a sling, making it impossible for him to load the table. I don't know why, but I slowed down. Maybe I felt sorry for him. Maybe I didn't want to be the kind of person who just keeps driving. "Need some help?" I called out through the passenger window. He looked up, startled, and then smiled. Late 20s, maybe 30, he was handsome in a rugged way, with stubble and honest eyes. "Am I that pathetic?" he asked, his voice carrying a faint chuckle. "Kinda," I replied with a grin. "Yeah, I could definitely use a hand," he said, stepping back from the nightstand. I parked and got out. The cool night air felt soothing on my skin. He gestured to the piece of furniture, and I bent down to grab one side. And that's when everything changed. Before I could process what was happening, a white cloth was clamped over my mouth and nose. The chemical smell was overpowering, suffocating. I tried to scream, to fight, but there was no one to hear me, and the world went dark. When I woke up, I was in a dimly lit room. My head throbbed and my limbs were heavy. Panic set in as I realized my wrists and ankles were bound tightly with nylon. My shoes were gone, but I was otherwise fully clothed. Small mercies, I thought, though it did little to ease the terror building in my chest. The room was bare, illuminated only by the dim light of a cell phone on the floor. Against the wall sat the man, his sling gone, both arms fully functional. He noticed me stirring and smirked. "It's about time," he said casually, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He tilted his head. "You know," he began, "I've met a lot of women like you. Kind-hearted, helpful, Utah, Colorado, Washington. Y'all are all over the place. Always the same. But now I'm here in Florida, and I figured it's time to try something different. Something a little more fun, a little more fair." My stomach churned as he leaned forward and whispered in my ear. "Do you know what's about 50 miles west of Jacksonville?" he asked. I stared at him, too terrified to answer. "Didn't think so. Nobody does," he said, almost amused. "It's just trees, acres and acres of trees. And that's where you are. Just a cozy cabin in the middle of nowhere." My heart pounded as he pulled a knife from his pocket. "All right, here's the game," he said, kneeling beside me. "I'm going to cut these ropes, and you're going to run. I'll give you a 2-minute head start. No, 5. I'll give you a 5-minute head start." "What?" I breathed, my voice barely audible. "You heard me. Run, hide, whatever you think will keep you alive," he grinned. "But just so we're clear, you don't have a chance." The blade sliced through the ropes at my wrists and ankles. I barely had time to register the pain of pins and needles as the blood rushed back into my limbs before he pressed a flashlight into my hands. 5 minutes, he said, stepping back and gesturing towards the door. "Better make 'em count." I didn't think. I just ran. The door wailed as I shoved it open, the cold air the least of my concerns. My bare feet slapped against the dirt, every sharp twig and rock biting into my skin. But I didn't care. I couldn't care, and I couldn't stop. The flashlight's weak beam bobbed wildly as I sprinted, my breath coming in gasps. The trees seemed endless, a labyrinth of trunks and branches that all looked the same. I had no sense of direction, no plan. All I could do was move forward. All I could do was play into his stupid game. The seconds felt like hours. My chest burned, my legs screamed, and I kept going. When I finally couldn't anymore, I ducked behind a thick tree and collapsed, trying to silence my ragged breathing. And that's when I heard it, the crunch of boots on dry leaves. He was close. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't help me. My heart raced as the sound grew louder, each step deliberate, unhurried. He wasn't in a rush. Why would he be? He was playing. This was his game. A branch snapped, and I swallowed a scream. He was near, too near. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled, paused, then resumed. He was toying with me. He was savoring his hunt. I waited until the sound moved further away before I dared to run again. Every instinct screamed to keep going, to put as much distance as possible between us. I stumbled through the underbrush, my feet slick with blood and mud. The flashlight flickered and I cursed under my breath. 5 minutes were up a long time ago, his voice called out, too close for comfort. You're just prolonging the inevitable. I bit my tears back, forcing myself to move faster, but the forest seemed to be closing in around me. Was I going in circles? Had I passed that tree before? Panic twisted my stomach as the flashlight gave one final sputter and died. There was no moon, no light, just darkness. I don't know how long I ran after that. Time felt meaningless. My body moved on instinct alone, even as exhaustion clawed at me. Eventually my legs gave out, and I collapsed in a heap on the forest floor. I could still hear him somewhere in the distance, his footsteps methodical, unhurried. This is it, I thought. But then something caught my eye, a faint light through the trees. A house? A road? It didn't matter. It was hope, and I clung to it with every fiber of my being. The light grew brighter until I could make out its source, a porch lamp hanging over a weathered wooden door. I stumbled to my feet and banged on the door with every ounce of my strength I had left. Help, please help, somebody, I screamed. The door creaked open and a man peered out, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. Before I could say a word, the sound of boots crunching on gravel made me freeze. He was here. The porch light illuminated the man from the forest, his handsome face twisted into a predatory grin. Evening, he said, his voice dripping with charm. The homeowner frowned, his eyes darting between us. What's going on here? Oh, she's with me, the man said smoothly, taking a step forward. No, I choked. No, he's lying. The homeowner hesitated, and in that moment, I realized the choice was his. My fate hung in the balance, and all I could do was hope he believed me. The man's grin faltered as the homeowner reached behind the door and fired one shot into the air. Step away. Next one's in your face, he growled at my attacker. For the first time, the predator's confidence wavered. I never knew how close I came to dying that night, but as the man fled into the darkness and the authorities were called, I realized something that would haunt me forever. I had survived, but somewhere out there, he was still hunting. The bright orange and white sign of the store or more facility was impossible to miss. I put the moving truck in park and pulled out my phone, thumbing through photos to find the gate code screenshot. It had to be there somewhere, buried among the blocks of pictures. My scrolling accelerated as frustration crept in. Graduation photos, my first apartment, and then came shots of my ex. A jarring reminder that I'd gone too far. Of course, that's where I always end up. Places I don't want to be. Finally, I thought, a word I never expected to associate with pictures of my brother's funeral. I rented the storage unit just after he passed to store his stuff and a little of my own, so I knew that the gate code screenshot couldn't be far off. My parents and I couldn't toss his things out, and we couldn't bring ourselves to live with them either. And sure enough, there it was, the obnoxious orange block with 8 white numbers. I zoomed in on the code and a loud bang on the window jolted me. My phone nearly slipped from my hands. I turned to see a wiry man with glasses, a tie-dye shirt, and jorts, standing between the keypad and my moving truck. He looked harmless enough, I thought, as I rolled down my window. You scared the hell out of me. Sorry about that, he said. Need some help? I've been sitting behind you for a while now. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Sure enough, his old gray SUV was parked just behind the truck. I didn't see you back there. My bad. I just found my gate code though, so I'm all set. I held up my phone to show him the bright orange screen. He chuckled. Nah, I'll just punch mine in. I'm closer anyhow. The gate buzzed and slid open. Thanks, I muttered, not sure how I felt about someone being so friendly. No problem. He gave me a wave and got back in his SUV and drove off to the outdoor units. I sat there for a moment, watching his taillights vanish into the maze. The place felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. Pulling through the gate, I parked as close as I could to the main building, a 3-story temperature-controlled tower. This wasn't my first time at Stormworm. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, but it was the first time I'd come inside since my brother died. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was uneventful, but as the door slid open, I couldn't help but notice how the motion-activated lights flickered to life with a faint buzz. The rows of units stretched endlessly, each one identical to the last, forming a labyrinth of orange metal doors and blank walls. 319, 319. I repeated the unit number under my breath, as if saying it aloud would help me find it faster. Finding the unit turned out to be harder than I expected. The columns branched to rows, and everything looked the same. Eventually, I found it. It's about time, I thought. The lock resisted as I twisted the key, but I managed to roll the door up. The sight of my brother's stuff hit me harder than I expected. His life, condensed into a 5x10 space. And just then I remembered I'd forgotten the dolly. I can't do anything right. Retracing my steps to the elevator, I noticed something strange. The lights to the right of the elevator were on, even though I hadn't been down that way. And I knew no one had come up. I hadn't heard the elevator, and everything in this building echoes all the way through. Maybe the motion sensors were faulty or there was bad wiring. Who knows? Back at the unit, I stacked the dolly with boxes, trying to focus on the task at hand. But the feeling crept up on me, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I spun around. I felt like a crazy person. There was nothing there. Just empty corridors and the hum of lights. Shaking it off, I rolled the dolly back to the truck. The rain had started, a metallic drumming on the facility's roof. It was almost comforting after the silence inside. On the second trip, the lights flickered out just as I finished loading the dolly. Waving my hands, I got them back on, but something felt wrong. The light at the far end of the hall blinked off, then back on. My heart thudded in my chest. Hello? My voice echoed, shaky and uncertain. Nothing. Just the echo of my voice returning to me. I quickened my pace, my eyes darting to every darkened row as I passed. By the time I reached the elevator, my pulse was racing. The far light blinked again, taunting me. Still waiting on the elevator, curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the row where the light had flickered. No one. Just more storage units, and silence. Hurrying back, I caught the elevator just before the doors closed. I grabbed the dolly and stepped inside. As I bent to lift it over the ribbed metal floor, I felt a sharp sting in my neck. Pain flared, then blurred into confusion as the walls spun. I collapsed onto the elevator floor, my vision fading fast. Through the haze, I saw him. The guy from the front gate, standing over me with a syringe in his hand. He stood over me, silent. It's the last thing I remembered before waking up in the tub of a seedy motel room. The tub was full of ice, and my lower back was throbbing. I don't think I'm gonna make it. 2 p.m. feels safe, which is what makes it the best time to hunt. Brandon never hunted anything in season, nor did he ever do it alone, or at least, not with people anyway. He didn't care much for people. They always seemed to disappoint in one way or another, but not Daisy. Never Daisy. The 4-year-old beagle went everywhere with him. She lived to run wild through the empty Florida forest. The reserve contained 1 million acres of land between Highway 301 and a cluster of small north-central Floridian towns. You hear that, Daisy? Brandon said. We're getting close to the highway. Now, calling it a highway would be an overstatement for most folks, but not in the sticks. If it's paved and connects more than a town or two, it's a highway. And this particular highway had an off-ramp every few miles featuring a gas station and maybe even a dollar store. Daisy stayed behind Brandon as they went to what he called his lucky spot. The area sat less than a quarter mile from the highway and not more than 60 feet from a lonely side road connecting a small, unincorporated city called Sandburg with a slightly larger town to the west called Santo that was just big enough to merit a map dot. Brandon's lucky spot was technically illegal, being so close to the public road and all, but he came from the highfalutin philosophy of no charge, no crime. Besides, no more than 2 or 3 cars drove by per hour, and Brandon was a patient man who knew better than to hunt close to a highway, and Daisy was a quiet hound when she had to be. Brandon crept out of the woods, looked both ways, and saw no one. He kicked the roadside gravel around, clearing a small circle. He tried to avoid getting pebbles on the paved 2-lane road as he trampled a smooth spot for Daisy. "Sit now." "Good girl," he said, giving Daisy a piece of beef jerky that she immediately inhaled. "Play dead now," he said. Daisy lay on the smooth patch of gravel Brandon cleared moments before, belly in the air. "Good girl, now stay," he whispered as he crept back into the tree line. Brandon stood behind an old oak, leaned his bow against the tree, and waited. Half an hour passed before Brandon heard a car approaching in the distance. Hidden behind the massive oak, he drew an arrow. He heard the crunch of roadside gravel and knew it was time. He peeked his head out ever so slightly and watched as a young woman opened the door of her little blue Civic. The scope of his bow left little to the imagination. The woman wore a gray dress, and her styled black hair curled at the tips in the Florida humidity. He kept her center scope as she inched closer to Daisy, whose legs remained in the air. Meryl Streep's lucky they don't give Oscars to dogs, Brandon thought. He pulled his arrow tight as the young woman bent over to check on Daisy. Brandon exhaled slowly and let go. The woman hit the ground fast and hard. Daisy leapt to her feet and began to lick the woman's pale face as blood colored her gray dress black. Brandon emerged from the woods, bow in hand. "Daisy, let the woman die in peace." "Help," she gasped. A painful grimace tore across her face. "Help? I'm the one who shot you," he said, kicking her phone out of reach. "What?" "I shot you," Brandon said, as if speaking to a child. "It's nothing personal. And if it's any consolation, you're my first of the season." "But why?" she whispered. "You pulled over," Brandon said so matter-of-factly, as he pulled the final arrow and did what hunters call the humane thing.